Morning, everyone, and welcome to our 22nd Fusion Friday. My name is Alex Alvarez.
My name is Brian Mulkpinsik.
And we're application engineers here at KETIV Technologies. So for today, we are going to be talking about modeling inside of Fusion 360, right? So again, some of the tips and tricks that Brian has developed throughout the years of using Fusion 360, as well as some of the updates that Autodesk had for Fusion 360, right? As we all know, Autodesk did release a previous update not too long ago. So we have been getting questions from a couple customers here asking what those updates were and how do you work some of those updates, right? So hopefully we can answer a few questions here in the upcoming webinar, right? So again, if you guys are new to Fusion Fridays, it's just a series of webinars where we go over all the workspaces that Fusion 360 has to offer, as well as some of the updates that Autodesk has for Fusion 360 as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Brian and get the webinar going.
All right. Thanks, Alex. So the purpose of this webinar is to make sure that you guys are one step ahead of your competitors. And just by attending this webinar and obviously watching the next at least 20 minutes, you will be. You will and you must learn at least one new trick within the next 20 minutes of this webinar.
Yeah, to be frank there, guys, I actually did learn something new from Brian watching him just do the warm up here before the webinar. So hopefully you guys will learn something new as well.
So I did a little bit of digging to find some of these extra tricks, but for the most part, these are modeling workflows that Alex and I use to be really efficient as possible in Fusion 360. And just learning these tips and tricks will make you smarter than you were yesterday. And that entails growth, and growth is pretty much happiness, and that's what life is. So let's get to that. Very straightforward today. Goals. We want to increase your modeling speed. We want to increase your modeling capabilities by the different tools that we'll go over today, the new tools, and start an assembly correctly. We get a lot of questions from customers and colleagues as well as to, oh, am I doing this assembly right? I'm not really used to it. How do you go about it? We'll answer those questions here as well. Once again, if you have any questions during the webinar or any comments at all or any suggestions to the future Fusion Fridays that you want to see, leave them in the GoToMeeting chat room.
Before you jump in there, Brian, also, I'm going to post the link to our meetup. So for those of you guys that are interested, just be on the lookout there in the chat dialog box.
Yep.
For the link.
Yeah, it's free to sign up. It's on May 23rd, Wednesday at 11 a.m. So we'll be there. Hope to see you guys there too. There's also pizza if that influences anyone or motivates anyone. Okay, here in Fusion 360, I have a list actually of what I want to go over. And I'm going to go down that list. So get a notepad and a pen out and write down the ones that you really think are valuable to you. So first, I'm going to start with this example of this part. And notice how there is a hole that is created, a smaller hole here and then a larger hole below there. And this was actually a question that a customer had for me. And he wanted to actually have this line here go all the way through to that line without this hole or this part of the circle extruding out there. And he got this file from a foreign file source. Obviously, I created this here in Fusion, as you can tell by the design history at the bottom, but I wanted to replicate it. But he couldn't have access to any of the features or the sketches to it. And what he wanted to do was have this be a continuous line. So he was thinking of maybe patching it. And so he asked me for guidance. And I asked him, do you know what direct edit modeling is? And he said he did, but he didn't think of that right away when he saw this issue. So what direct edit modeling is, for those of you who don't know, is you're able to directly edit your bodies, whether it's without the sketches. So if I have a body here, like this face here, I can hit delete, click on it, hit delete, and Fusion deletes it in a way while also repairing it to the integrity of what's already occurring here in the model. So as you can see here, it kept the integrity of the fillet and this flat surface, but it also made a bigger hole than I really wanted. So instead, I'd rather get rid of this hole altogether. The customer said he didn't need the hole because he just wanted to use this for cam. In this case, we actually want to fillet this line to that line without this hole. So let's try a different collection of maneuvers here. So I'm going to try selecting this face here and hitting delete. And unfortunately, that didn't work either. It gave us a little error message here at the bottom right saying it couldn't heal the region when I tried deleting that face. And you might get this sometimes, especially when starting off with direct edit modeling. You just need to know how the tool works alongside your regular modeling tool set. So what I tried after that was actually selecting these two faces here and then hitting delete. And that did the trick. It got rid of the two different size holes for us, and now we can create that fillet there. What you can also do with direct edit modeling is you can actually select those faces as well and move them to a different location.
Now this is huge too, guys, right? Because oftentimes, especially machine shops that I've been working with, they don't necessarily do the modeling themselves, right? They usually get parts or files from different customers. And same concept applies, right? They don't get the design history or any of those features. And oftentimes they ask for small changes. So anything like a fillet or maybe a chamfer on an edge, and you want to see that modeled in there, just do direct edit modeling inside of Fusion 360 and make those changes, right? You don't have to go back to the customer, ask for a change, and waste time there. Just do it yourself and make those changes there.
Exactly. It's super powerful, and it works definitely on those external or foreign files that come in. All right, so now we're able to fillet this because it's one continuous straight line. So what I'm going to do is hit F on my keyboard for fillet. And I also want to fillet that as well, but that will come later. And I'm going to select each one of these edges here, as well as maybe the top series of edges as well. Enter in my fillet value and hit enter. But notice how when I want to fillet this edge, let me give it a value of some sort. It might not give me the fillet that I want, or if I wanted to fillet it at a 0.75 fillet, it's not going to do that for me because of the existing fillets here. So the order does matter when it comes to filleting. So what I'm going to do here instead is actually fillet the corners first. And this is the tip I like to call fillet the verticals first and then the horizontals. So this is vertical. Wait, let me hit fillet first. This is vertical. This is a vertical. That one. And of course that one. And now when I do my fillets, and I want to do the top and bottom ones, it gives me a contour of the entire series of edges there, rather than trying to select one at a time. And it's also going to allow me to create this fillet the way I wanted it to be created, right?
Also, during that point too, guys, you can have different fillets in there as well, right? So it wasn't, I believe it was last week when a customer asked for a tapered fillet. So you also have the option to select from the drop down once you select an edge, which kind of fillet you want to use there.
Right. So next, let's look at another feature. So I have this sketch here that I created earlier, and notice how we have these holes or these circles that go around it, and I actually want to use those to create holes in my model. So let me first activate the sketch, and now when I want to use the extrusion tool, when I go over the profiles, notice how I have to click twice every time to select the entirety of the hole. This is because, as most of you guys may know, this line in the middle going through it is a normal line. And the best modeling habits for that is actually to make that a construction line. So I had to click 8 times for the 4 different holes, and now I can do my extrusion. Rather, what I want to do is actually select this line. I could double click on the line to select the entirety of the lines or the series of edges. And then I can right click and then hit normal construction, and this will make that a construction line. And now when I go to extrude the circles to make holes, I only had to select it 4 times instead of the 8. So now I have the holes created with less time, and it's more correctly, the sketch was more correctly edited as well. So you'd want to create that construction line instead of a solid line. Next, let's take a look at one of the new updates that Autodesk has. It was the hole feature. Normally we'd only see, so I hit H on my keyboard to activate this, and normally we'd only see the simple counterbore and countersink hole type, but now we can also see a clearance. We can make this hole tapped as well. Right, so what that means is it will actually eliminate the process of having to use the threaded holes after the creation of the hole. So it does 2-in-1. It's a 2-in-1 tool now. There's also, this is also new, this diagram, this picture at the bottom here that shows, you know, what numbers affects what features of the hole. You can create different offsets, or you can of the threads, as well as the drill point at the bottom. So another thing I'd like to mention is the model tab. So if you have tons of different threads in Fusion, it might be wise to uncheck the model tab. This doesn't make the thread actually something 3D, something you could 3D print. By having this checked off, it just leaves a picture of the thread. But that's actually sometimes good, because if you have like 100 different threads in your model, it only shows a picture, which means you don't have to have as much data to carry around. So Fusion might work a little bit faster for you that way, in that sense. Also, another feature I want to show is the objects to cut here at the bottom. Notice how I want to create my hole all the way through to the other body as well. If I go down here to objects to cut and make sure body 3 is checked, the hole will be cut. It will continue through to body 3 and body 1 as well. So the thread will continue through. So if I leave that checked, hit OK, you can kind of see there's the thread that goes through coming in from the top hole as well. So if you leave that unchecked, that hole tool or the objects to cut, if you leave body 3 unchecked, it wouldn't create that hole through body 3 here. All right, next, let's say we want to create a little plug for these 4 holes here on the corners. And normally people would want to use a move copy command, for instance, to copy the one plug from hole to hole. Let me just create a simple plug here. And yeah, that's totally fine. You can right click on body 4 here in the browser, move copy, and then you can do I'm going to do a point-to-point copy, for instance. Select the middle of that, the middle of that. It moves it over. If I check this create copy box, then it'll create a copy of it as well. And you could do that maybe 2 more times. But what I like to do, especially if you have a bunch of different holes or different plugs to, or different holes to plug in with these plugs, is I'd like to actually select the body, hit Control C, hit Control V, just like in like a Word document, Control copy and paste. And now that I have it pasted, I can do that same maneuver without having to do the move copy command. And the quick thing about this is that I already have that copied to my clipboard. So now if I want to create a new one, I can just hit Control V and skip all of those steps together and do the point-to-point to that last hole there. So now we went from move copy and having to create a copy every time to just hitting Control V and then point-to-point, Control V, then point-to-point instead.
I have a quick question here from Jaime Brian. He's asking, is there a list for all the Fusion 360 hotkeys? So there is actually. Let me go ahead and post it real quick for you guys in the chat box there. So just feel free to click on the link and then just get a quick printout for that, because there are tons of hotkeys, right, that can definitely speed up your workflow here and maybe open some new capabilities that you guys weren't aware of.
Yep, definitely. I was gonna go over a few of my favorite ones, but yeah, there's a lot of hotkeys out there. I don't use all of them, of course, but I use some of them quite often. Yeah. So next, let's talk about, we can't go through how to model quickly without talking about the toolbar and toolbox. Bear with me if you've seen it before, but if you're new, this is super useful. If you go here to what is called the toolbar, you can actually pin tools that preferably the ones you use most often to your toolbar by hitting that curved arrow. So now it's up here and ready to access quickly without having to dig through your panel for it. However, if you want to remove it, simply go to it and hit the X to get that out of there. The toolbox, you hit S on your keyboards, one of those hotkeys we mentioned, and you have a search engine pretty much for all your tools. And this is different for every workspace you're in, whether it's CAM or sheet metal or etc. And if you can't find the tools digging through your toolbar, you can use the toolbox. If I wanted the center diameter circle tool, I can start typing it in. It appears there. And then I have access to it right away.
Yeah, so this leads us to our next question here from Swami. He's asking for updates on custom hotkeys. So that's actually on the roadmap. That's been on the roadmap for quite some time now. But what Brian just covered is essentially kind of like a workaround in the meantime, right? So use the toolbox, the sketch toolbox, model toolbox to its full capabilities, and just type in real quickly what you want to search for, right? But yeah, the hotkeys are on the roadmap. Autodesk isn't really saying when that's going to come out.
But if you upvote that on the idea station, then the more likely it will happen. Kind of like when sheet metal was the most upvoted, then sheet metal came into Fusion. So that's going to be a similar thing for the hotkeys there. Thanks for asking that question. So now let's talk about the hotkeys. That's next on my list here. So a lot of you don't know this. I found this out from a customer actually by hitting F6 on your keyboard. If you're zoomed in here and you're lost somewhere on the screen, you can just hit F6 and it brings you whatever you're working on to the extents of the screen. So even if you have if you accidentally created a sketch like somewhere out here in space, which I have actually done a couple times before, and I'm like, where did my sketch go? What is going on? I would hit F6 on my keyboard and I'm like, oh, there was a sketch created over there. Let me go ahead and delete that. But if it's hiding, if you hide it and then you hit F6, Fusion only shows you what is visible. So that's one of the hotkeys I've been using more frequently, and it's really helpful because it just really quickly goes to your
to the model there.
To your models and sketches. Yeah.
You can also double click on the mouse wheel and should have the same effect. Yeah.
Yep. Just double clicked on the mouse wheel right there. Yep. To do the F6, I guess. And also, I always have my left hand on the keyboard, because whether I'm doing a hotkey or holding escape. So for instance, if I want to do a fillet and I don't want to do the fillet anymore, like let's say I created fillet, I'm like, I don't want to really do it anymore. I hit escape to quickly get out of that. And that goes for any tool that I'm using, any window that pops up, I just hit escape to get out of it. Kind of like refreshes my mouse or my next intentions there. And lastly, I'm not going to go over all of them, but lastly, I'd like to use the right click and repeat the last feature that I've done. And this is super useful because when you're trying to create a bunch of different slots or something, for instance, and there's no hotkey for a slot tool, what I like to do is just go right click and then go 12 o'clock, and it'll be the last thing that you've done. All right, so this is something more related to the data panel. If you are newer to Fusion especially, you might have a grid view in your data panel. So if you hit this little gear here, settings, you can actually change this to a list. and it does shrink the image of the model here, but it increases the number of models you can see. And this is the way I prefer viewing that. And that's just something a little small that I just wanted to add in there in case people are stuck in the grid setting. All right, so now let's go ahead and open up a new design for this next example. So I'll go ahead and just create a simple body that I will give some dimensions for. And it'll make sense in a second. And one fillet. We'll give it a little feature there. So you guys heard me talk about parameters before. If you haven't, parameters are variables you can use to edit your model. And these variables can be edited or adjusted by going here to the parameters tool. And normally what you'd do is you'd hit this plus symbol, give it a name, and enter an expression for it. And now I can use that variable if I go into one of my sketches, maybe for the width here. And now every time I change my variable in my parameter in the window here, I don't have to go into the sketch and change it there. Right? But what I recently dug up was if you go to compute all instead, this actually computes all the different possible parameters that can be created for this model. So what's neat about that, by hitting Control B or hitting this tool here, it doesn't look like anything happened, but it did in the background. And if we go here to the parameters now, we have this drop down arrow, which has the sketch one that I had with the length and width of the rectangle. It has the extrusion as well. And there's also a taper option and a fillet. So what I can do actually, so now I have a bunch of different parameters that were automatically generated for me. So what I can do is change maybe the width or length, whichever one this one is, of the model. And I didn't have to go in and manually create a parameter for that. And I can rename that whatever I want as well. So I found this to be super useful and super practical and efficient. This is something I can see a lot of people using, and I don't think too many people knew about that. But yeah, you can use that tool to create automatic parameters for you.
And it kind of helps out too, right? It sometimes, I guess, it eliminates the need to think ahead and think of exactly which parameters you're going to need to create as the designer, right? So instead, just have Fusion 360 create all the parameters for you, and then pick which ones you're going to need to actually update your model.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't have to use all of them if you don't need to. So now let's talk about assembly creation. And this is a very common topic. And like I said in the beginning, that a lot of people ask questions about this. So let's say you want to create or let me show you the way people traditionally create assemblies in Fusion. And this is what we've also been had a bad habit of doing in the beginning as well. So normally you would go straight to the sketch, right? Create a 2D sketch, extrude that out to a 3D body. And then you decide, hey, I want to create a assembly from this. Let me create another 2D sketch and a 3D body from that. So now you have two bodies, and if you want to mate or joint the two, then you'd want to make these components. And that's another conversation about joints for assemblies and creating them into components. But pretty much you want to create these into components. So to do that, a lot of people go here to the bodies, right click, and create components from bodies. Now there's nothing wrong with that, because now you can use joints to put these two together, whether it's a rigid joint, cylindrical joint, etc. However, you don't get your sketches right away to be tied to your component. And it's a little disorganized as well, because if you have sketch 1 here, you don't know if it's going to be for which body, or if you have different features located here, you don't know how it affects the model. And also, if you try to do a right-click save copy as, or creating or separating your component from this assembly altogether, it actually doesn't come with the sketch. So if you do, sometimes you can try to drag in. So I'm going to drag in sketch 1 into component 1. I'll show you guys what it does. It doesn't really quite behave the way we want it to behave. It kind of like did something there that I didn't want. So sometimes you can't even bring your sketch along with the component. So that's why I don't recommend doing it this way, although we normally do it this way, unless you don't mind the sketches being separated from the components here. And now I'll show you the right way to do it. Every time you want to start a new part or assembly, either or, you want to go here to create and hit new component. Now I know it's not all flashy and neon lights like, hey, do this first, even though we're used to, you know, going from sketch then modeling next. But this is the way you want to do it. Always start with create new component. All right, so you can name your component whatever you want here. Then once I hit OK, notice our top level component, that's what we call this right here, change from a cube to a 3 cubes here to show that it's an assembly. And now we have our component 1 down below here. And if you want to start creating component 1, you can hit this circle next to it to activate it. Now everything I do from this point forward will be all located in the component 1 container. Notice down below here, we got our body and our sketch, all located in component 1. Now, if you want to create another part to make an assembly, another component to make an assembly, you would go to create new component again. But before you do that, make sure you're not activated in component 1, because then it'll create a component within this component, and you wouldn't want that. So what you would want to do is go out to the top level component, then hit create new component. And I hope that makes sense. It's a little bit confusing, I understand, but after seeing it a few times, it'll hopefully make sense to you. So I'm creating a new component, having the top level component active. I'll check this box to activate it right away. And now, whatever I do from this point forward will be, and because this is activated, will be stored in the component 2 container. So if I create a sketch again, and notice how my component 1 is a little ghosted out. It's because we're not in that workspace anymore. We're in the component 2 workspace. And now if I go back to the top level component, you can see that I have both component 1, component 2 in the same design. And I have my bodies and sketches correlating to the correct component that it lies in. Now, if I right click and save copy as, or separate this component from this assembly, it will bring its sketches along with it, as well as any construction geometry that you might have. Now, notice how once you start doing more and more of these components, you might get too messy down below here, and you might not know which sketch goes with which component. To fix that, or to help you organize that better, you can actually go under inspect and turn on component color cycling toggle, or shift N. And this will color code the components for you. So now everything here in the bottom, if you see this tan color represents component 1. And then this more yellowy orange yellow color represents component 2. Now people ask me, what if there's something that affects, if you want to affect both components at the same time, what happens then? So let's try that. So let's do a cut that actually cuts through both of these components, and make sure you have the top level component activated for this. So now notice that the color is I'll just call it orange and yellow. Notice how the orange and yellow extrusion or colors show up for this extrusion. So that helps us to show that it affects both of the components. And once you separate this component from the assembly by save copy as, it will bring this extrusion with it, and it'll figure out a way to show that while it's separated as well. All right. So yeah, if you guys have any questions about that workflow at all, please feel free to leave it in the comments section or email us individually as well. We'd love to talk about this and help clarify any misunderstandings, if any. All right. So lastly, I want to talk about if you want to delete an object from your model or from your assembly in particular, how would you go about that? So if you have this assembly here and you want to get rid of the yellow one, you can, a lot of people like to click on the component and hit delete, or you can right click and hit delete. But when you do that, it gives us a warning saying, hey, this is being referenced by other features. It's not a good idea to delete it. We'll do it anyways because people like to do that anyways. And it worked. Everything's fine. We still have the hole there for this component, but it gives us a warning symbol here at the bottom right saying there's a reference failure because it was deleted. Also, when you save and exit out of Fusion and open it up again, you can't go back to undo it like I just did right now. It would be out of reach, and this component will be essentially gone forever. So the best workaround for that is actually going to it, right-clicking on it, and instead of hitting delete, you'd want to actually hit remove. And what remove does is first, it creates an instance of that in the timeline down below here. So even if you save, exit, and open it up again, you can still have access to that component by putting it back in by dragging this back in the design history. So now you still have that. Also, notice how there's no error symbol appearing down below here or in the bottom right-hand corner there either, because the reference is still there. It was just removed. So it's still there in a sense in the earlier in time, but it wasn't completely deleted like we did initially.
We have a quick question here, Brian, before you move on.
Yeah.
How did you colorize the different components there? Can you just show where that?
So it's located under inspect, and it's right at the bottom here. You can also hit Shift N on your keyboard to access the different colors. Perfect. All right. So write down our emails and write down the KETIV phone number if you want to contact us for any Fusion 360 training or any Autodesk training in general as well. So
yeah, so I guess it's now time for some questions. So we did answer a few questions throughout the webinar. We have one more question here, appears to be from Sean. He's asking, is there any more information out there for assemblies, or is there something like any more resources that you can help us or help him out with? And we do. We actually have a webinar on assemblies, right, inside of Fusion 360. So that's in our YouTube channel, Sean. I can also just reach out to me and I'll set up a Zoom meeting, maybe 30 minutes, and we'll get that covered for you and just give you a quick demo on how to do that inside of Fusion.
For all of us, we'll go ahead and end the webinar and see you guys in 2 weeks.
Yep.
So thanks for watching.
Thanks, guys.